The qualification board turned her away without explanation. "We need real combat pilots," they said, though her file showed 2,000 combat hours. For years, she'd outperformed everyone in simulations, identified critical flaws no one else spotted. Yet the Apache program remained closed to her. Then came the demonstration day when the military's most advanced attack helicopter malfunctioned mid-flight, spiraling out of control as generals watched in horror. Without orders, she sprinted across the tarmac and climbed into the cockpit. What happened next changed military aviation forever. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you value stories of excellence prevailing against unfair barriers, consider subscribing for more. Fort Rucker Army Aviation Center buzzed with anticipation. Today, the elite Apache qualification board would select pilots for the most advanced attack helicopter in the military arsenal. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the sterile white waiting room, where 12 candidates sat in tense silence. Among them, Captain Elowen Marquis reviewed her notes one last time, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform crisp despite the Alabama humidity. She was the only woman in the room. Outside the windows, 3 AH-64D Apaches circled in formation, their distinctive silhouettes casting moving shadows across the candidates. The men exchanged stories in low voices, building camaraderie through shared experiences. "That night insertion at Kandahar," a square-jawed major was saying, "thought we'd never make it out." "Try Fallujah during a sandstorm," another countered. "Lost visibility completely, flew by instruments alone." Elowen remained focused on her notes, though she could have added stories that would have silenced them all. Instead, she studied the technical specifications of the Guardian's enhanced sensor suite, mentally reviewing emergency protocols and system redundancies. The door opened sharply. Lieutenant Colonel Darren Blackwood entered, clipboard in hand, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Attention!" The candidates snapped to their feet, spines straight, eyes forward. "When I call your name, you will proceed to the boardroom for initial evaluation," Blackwood announced, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. He began reading names. Major Phillips, Captain Hernandez, Lieutenant Wilson. One by one, the male pilots were called, each receiving a respectful nod as they entered the boardroom. The waiting room emptied gradually until only Elowen remained, standing at perfect attention. Blackwood checked his list with a frown, scanning it twice. "Captain Marks, there must be some mistake. Wait here." He disappeared into the boardroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. Through the opening, heated voices carried fragments of conversation. "Not now," someone said firmly. Another voice responded with something about image problem. "Combat readiness concerns," a third voice added. Elowen remained at attention, eyes fixed forward, though her knuckles whitened around the folder containing her qualifications. The wall clock ticked loudly in the empty room, marking 5 minutes, then 10. A maintenance technician entered with a clipboard, nodding apologetically as he crossed to a desk in the corner. He sorted through paperwork, seemingly unaware of the tension in the room. Elowen glimpsed the logs he was reviewing, maintenance records for the previous day's training flight. A mission aborted due to unexplained rotor vibration. The very issue she had documented in her cross-training report 3 months earlier, a report that had been filed away without action. Blackwood returned, his face carefully composed as he avoided direct eye contact. "The board has reviewed your application package in advance, Captain Marks. You're not selected for this qualification cycle." The words landed like physical blows, yet Elowen's expression remained neutral. "May I ask on what grounds, sir?" "Not enough combat hours," Blackwood replied, his gaze fixed somewhere over her left shoulder. In his hand, her file was clearly visible, the red tab of the combat service section prominently displayed, the same section that documented over 2,000 combat flight hours, including night operations in hostile territory. "Sir, with respect, my flight record shows..." "The board's decision is final, Captain." His tone softened slightly, almost patronizing. "We need real combat pilots for the Apache program, Marks. Maybe next year?" The maintenance technician glanced up, then quickly looked away, discomfort evident in his hunched shoulders. "Dismissed," Blackwood added, turning back toward the boardroom. Elowen saluted crisply, collected her materials, and exited the building, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. She passed a wall display celebrating the Apache program's history. 53 portraits of qualification graduates stared back at her, all men. Some from decades past, when combat restrictions for women might have explained the disparity. But the most recent class had graduated just 3 months ago, long after those restrictions had been lifted. Stepping into the blinding Alabama sun, Elawan walked across the parking lot, her movements measured despite the churning in her stomach. At her car, a folded note had been tucked under the windshield wiper. She unfolded it, reading the anonymous message. Not personal, orders from above. Some aircraft just aren't meant for women pilots. She crushed the paper in her fist, then carefully smoothed it out again and placed it in her pocket. Evidence, not emotion. That had always been her approach. The drive to her small off-base apartment took 12 minutes. Inside, flight manuals and technical journals lined the shelves. No photos adorned the walls, no mementos beyond her framed commendations. Achievements that apparently counted for nothing in today's evaluation. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Major Whelan, her former flight instructor. She let it go to voicemail. Whatever consolation he offered would only make this harder. Later that evening, after the initial sting had subsided, Elawan drove back to the base. Most of the administrative buildings had emptied for the day, but the simulator lab remained accessible to qualified pilots preparing for missions. She swiped her ID, entering the darkened facility. The Apache simulator sat like a truncated insect in the center of the room, its replica cockpit surrounded by projection screens. Elawan powered up the system, selecting the emergency protocols program she had run countless times. The screens illuminated, creating the illusion of flight as she settled into the pilot's seat. Within minutes, she was fully immersed, responding to a cascading systems failure scenario that few pilots could navigate successfully. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, anticipating each failure before warning lights could even activate. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn, focused on completing the simulation. "Still at it, I see," came Major Thaddeus Whelan's voice. He watched from the doorway as she executed a perfect recovery sequence, bringing the virtual aircraft back from what should have been an unrecoverable spin. "Didn't feel like celebrating my rejection," she replied, finally turning as the simulation reset. Whelan, a lean man in his 40s with prematurely gray hair, leaned against the doorframe. "Heard about that. Blackwood's explanation was interesting, considering you've got more combat hours than half the current Apache instructors." "Not according to the board." "The board," Whelan repeated, his tone making clear what he thought of their decision. "They said the same thing to Elizabeth Coble in '94. She's flying left seat for United now, instead of serving her country." "I'm not leaving, Major. They're counting on you quitting, Elawan. That's how they avoid the discrimination paperwork." She turned back to the simulator, restarting the program with even more challenging parameters. The screens filled with warning indicators as she calmly worked through the virtual emergency. "Your technical scores are still the highest in the battalion," Whelan observed. "Simulation performance too. Apparently that's irrelevant without the right chromosomes." Whelan watched her work for several minutes before speaking again. "General Ambrose is coming next week, first field demonstration of the new AH-64E Guardian with enhanced rotor systems. Every qualified pilot will fly for him." "I'm not qualified, remember?" Elawan responded, eyes still on the simulator controls as she executed a maneuver that would have strained the physical aircraft to its limits. "No," Whelan agreed, approaching the simulator. He placed a card on the console beside her. "But you're on the ground crew. Rotation. You'll be closer to that Apache than any pilot until the demonstration begins." Elawan glanced at the card, a maintenance authorization with her name and security clearance printed across the top. "What exactly are you suggesting, Major?" Whelan was already walking toward the door. "Just saying the maintenance schedule shows the primary demonstration aircraft needs a systems check at 500 before anyone else arrives." The door closed behind him, leaving Elawan staring at the maintenance card with its unrestricted access authorization. On the simulator screen, red warning lights flashed as the virtual Apache responded to her commands, recovering from what should have been a catastrophic systems failure. The simulation timer showed a new record, 14 seconds faster than any previous attempt by any pilot. She ran the program twice more, pushing herself to beat her own record. On the third attempt, She activated every possible emergency simultaneously, creating a scenario so complex the simulator programmers hadn't even designed protocols for it. By all technical standards, the aircraft should have been unrecoverable. She recovered it anyway. When she finally shut down the simulator, the facility had grown dark around her, only the exit signs providing illumination. She collected the maintenance authorization card, turning it over in her hands. A dangerous proposition, certainly. Ground crew was not cockpit access. Systems check did not mean flight authorization. But then, what did she have to lose now? The next morning arrived with a heavy fog blanketing Fort Rucker. Visibility reduced to mere yards. Dawn had barely broken as Elowen drove through the security checkpoint, her maintenance credentials gaining her access to the airfield's restricted areas. Her uniform today was standard utility rather than dress, appropriate for the ground crew assignment she officially held. The massive hangar loomed through the mist, its doors partially open. Inside, the gleaming new AH-64E Guardian waited in solitary splendor, its advanced systems powered down. Its black and green camouflage making it resemble a predatory insect at rest. Elowen approached with maintenance clipboard in hand, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. She circled the helicopter, performing a methodical inspection that would seem routine to any observer. The aircraft represented the pinnacle of attack helicopter evolution. More advanced sensors, enhanced weapon systems, and most significantly, the new neural response technology that supposedly shortened pilot reaction time by connecting directly to human instincts. When she reached the cockpit, she hesitated, then climbed up to check the instrument panel. The cockpit felt different from the simulator, more immediate, more real. Her fingers traced the control systems with familiarity born from hundreds of simulation hours. "Early bird gets the worm, eh, Captain?" The voice startled her. Master Sergeant Finley, head of maintenance, watched from below, his weathered face impossible to read. "Just being thorough, Sergeant. The demonstrations today." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You know this bird's got the new neural response system, right? Connects directly to the pilot's reactions. They say it's revolutionizing response times. I've read the technical specs." "Bet you have." He paused, studying her with unexpected intensity. "Shame you won't fly it. Word is, you've got the highest technical scores in the battalion." Before she could respond, he continued, "System needs a full power cycle before the demo. Protocol says it should be done by a qualified pilot, but..." He shrugged. "I'm short-staffed this morning." He walked away, calling over his shoulder, "Don't touch anything I wouldn't touch, Captain." The implication hung in the air as his footsteps faded. Elowen remained in the cockpit, suddenly faced with a moment of decision that could alter her career irrevocably. Through the hangar's open doors, the fog was beginning to lift, revealing the empty airfield beyond. In 3 hours, that same field would be filled with officials and observers for the demonstration. By then, she would be just another ground crew member, watching from the periphery as others flew the aircraft she understood better than anyone. Unless she took this chance. With the maintenance bay now empty, Elowen sat fully in the pilot's seat. The aircraft seemed to welcome her, the cockpit wrapping around her body like it had been designed for her proportions. Her hands moved to the controls naturally, muscle memory from countless simulation hours guiding each movement as she ran through the pre-flight checklist. Systems hummed to life around her, displays illuminating with data streams and operational parameters. The Apache was no longer just metal and machinery, but an extension of herself, a sensation the simulator had approximated but never fully captured. She activated the neural response system, a technology so new that most pilots were still adjusting to its capabilities. The system calibrated quickly, almost eagerly, green status lights confirming optimal connection. For 15 precious minutes, she interfaced with the Apache's systems, testing responses, feeling the aircraft's potential. The technology seemed to anticipate her commands, creating a seamless connection between thought and machine. A distant door opened somewhere in the hangar. Elowen powered down reluctantly, the systems going dark under her touch. She climbed out quickly, resuming her inspection with clipboard in hand just as maintenance crew began arriving for their morning shifts. No one questioned her presence or actions. She was just another officer doing her job, invisible in her predictable role. By mid-morning, the airfield had transformed into a showcase. Chairs had been arranged for VIPs, technical displays set up for defense contractors, and a small grandstand erected for military observers. The fog had fully lifted, revealing a cloudless blue sky perfect for demonstrating the Apache's capabilities. General Victor Ambrose arrived precisely at 1,000 hours, his 3 stars gleaming on his uniform as he toured the facility with Colonel Harrison Reed, Fort Rucker's commanding officer. Behind them trailed an entourage of staff officers and defense contractors. From her position with the ground crew, Elowen watched the exchange, noticing how the general's gaze lingered on the aircraft with genuine interest rather than political obligation. The Guardian represents the future of attack aviation, Colonel Reed explained as they approached the demonstration area. Neural response technology reduces pilot reaction time by 23%. In combat, that's the difference between mission success and body bags. And your pilots are adapting to the new system? The general asked. Our best men have been training for months. Today's demonstration will showcase their proficiency. The subtle exclusion wasn't lost on Elowen. Our best men, not our best pilots. The distinction might seem semantic to some, but it represented the very barrier she fought against daily. Elowen continued her ground crew duties, checking systems and ensuring safety protocols were followed. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood passed by, doing a double take when he noticed her. Captain Marks, didn't expect to see you here today. Ground crew rotation, sir, she replied, gesturing to her clipboard. Someone has to make sure everything runs smoothly. Indeed. He seemed about to say more, then reconsidered. Carry on. As he walked away, Elowen heard him mutter to a colleague, persistent, I'll give her that. The demonstration began at 1100 hours with a standard display of maneuverability. Captain Maxwell Jenkins, the base's most decorated Apache pilot, performed textbook maneuvers to appreciative nods from the observers. 2 more pilots followed with similar demonstrations, each showcasing different capabilities of the platform. Then came the special demonstration of the neural response system. Captain Jenkins returned to the cockpit of the primary aircraft, the same one Elowen had interfaced with that morning. As he taxied into position, she noticed something she hadn't seen earlier, a slight imbalance in the rotor tension, visible only to someone who knew exactly what to look for. Jenkins initiated takeoff, the Apache rising smoothly at first. Then, almost imperceptibly, something changed. Warning lights flickered across the instrument panel, visible through the cockpit glass. The helicopter lurched, rotors faltering momentarily. The crowd murmured with concern. This wasn't part of the demonstration. Over the radio, Jenkins' voice crackled with controlled panic. Experiencing multiple system failures, neural interface is non-responsive. The Apache dropped 10 feet before Jenkins stabilized it temporarily, but the aircraft continued behaving erratically. Warning sirens now blared across the airfield. He attempted to land, but the controls responded unpredictably, the helicopter wobbling in midair. Neural system is locked, Jenkins reported, his voice tight with concentration. I'm getting opposite responses to inputs. Recommend immediate evacuation of demonstration area. Colonel Reed turned to his staff. Get a rescue team ready. If he can't land it, the radio crackled again. I'm losing control, preparing for emergency shutdown. Elowen knew what that meant. An emergency shutdown at hover height would drop the multi-million-dollar aircraft like a stone, potentially causing catastrophic damage and risking lives if it drifted toward the assembled crowd. The ground crew froze, uncertain how to respond to a crisis no one had anticipated. Even the experienced rescue team hesitated, waiting for commands as the situation deteriorated. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, each moment bringing the aircraft closer to catastrophic failure. Without conscious decision, Elowen broke from the ground crew line, sprinting toward the struggling helicopter. Her supervisor shouted after her, but she was already covering ground at remarkable speed, calculating approach vectors in her mind. As Jenkins initiated emergency shutdown procedures, Elowen reached the aircraft, climbing the access ladder with practiced efficiency. She reached the cockpit as Jenkins, seeing her approach, slid to the co-pilot seat in confusion, but desperate for assistance. "What are you doing?" he shouted over the roar of the malfunctioning systems. "Saving the aircraft," she replied, hands already moving across the controls with confident precision. The neural interface readings told her everything she needed to know. The system wasn't malfunctioning, it was inverting. Every input was producing the opposite of the intended response. Fighting it only made the problem worse, creating the feedback loop that had trapped Jenkins. Instead of fighting the erratic neural system, she adapted to it, working with its inverted responses, mentally reversing her commands to achieve the desired results. Her movements weren't textbook, they were intuitive, improvisational, yet precisely controlled. The Apache stabilized, hovering as she executed a complex series of commands, resetting subsystems without powering down the main rotors. On the ground, technical staff watched in disbelief as system warnings began clearing from their monitoring screens. "How are you doing that?" Jenkins asked, watching her hands dance across controls that had been fighting him moments before. Elowen didn't answer, fully immersed in communion with the machine. It felt like a dance where she had found the rhythm while everyone else heard different music. With the immediate crisis averted, she took the Apache up, accelerating into a vertical climb that showcased the aircraft's recovered capabilities. In one fluid motion that defied standard operating procedure, but demonstrated perfect control, she executed a maneuver that no one had attempted in the new model, flipping the craft into a controlled roll, recovering it midway, and stabilizing at hover without losing altitude. The crowd below watched in stunned silence, military personnel and civilians alike frozen in disbelief at what should have been impossible. She brought the Apache down in a textbook landing, powering systems down methodically before finally releasing the controls. Only then did she seem to remember where she was and what she'd done. Outside the cockpit, military police were already approaching, along with Colonel Reed, his face dark with anger. "Captain Marks, exit the aircraft immediately," Colonel Reed ordered as she climbed down. The airfield remained unnaturally quiet. Even the maintenance crews had stopped working, all eyes on the confrontation unfolding. Jenkins followed behind her, his expression still registering shock at what he'd witnessed. "Captain, you are not authorized to pilot the AH-64E," Reed continued, his voice carrying across the silent field. "Your actions constitute a direct violation of a remarkable display of airmanship," General Ambrose interrupted, approaching the group. "I've never seen anyone handle a cascading systems failure with such intuition." The general's unexpected intervention created an immediate tension. Colonel Reed stood straighter, caught between disciplining a subordinate and respecting a superior officer's assessment. "Sir," Reed began again, "Captain Marks violated direct orders. She is not Apache qualified and had no authorization to save a $30 million aircraft and potentially the lives of everyone in this demonstration area," the general finished. "Interesting priorities, Colonel." The gathering crowd had grown, pilots and technicians drawn by the unusual confrontation. Elowen remained at attention, her face revealing nothing, despite the career-defining moment unfolding around her. General Ambrose turned to a systems engineer standing nearby. "What exactly happened up there?" "The neural interface inverted," the engineer explained, consulting a tablet displaying diagnostic data. "It was doing the opposite of pilot inputs, a problem we've encountered in testing but never fully resolved. Most pilots fight against it, which makes it worse." He looked at Elowen with newfound respect. She adapted to it instead, worked with the inversion rather than against it. "I've never seen anyone process those adjustments that quickly." The general's gaze returned to Elowen, assessing her with new interest. "And you are not qualified for Apache operations because—" Before she could answer, Colonel Reed interposed himself between them. "Sir, Captain Marks lacks the necessary combat experience and technical proficiency for her file," a new voice interrupted. Major Whelan approached, holding a folder. "Her complete service record, sir, including the commendations that were removed before her. Qualification board review." A murmur ran through the gathered personnel. Tampering with service records was a serious offense, potentially career-ending for whoever was responsible. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood, standing at the edge of the group, took a half-step backward. General Ambrose took the folder, scanning its contents with increasing interest. The crowd remained frozen in place, the unusual public confrontation holding everyone's attention. "Two distinguished flying crosses," the general read aloud, his eyebrows rising. "Combat search and rescue operations in non-permissive environments. Over 2,000 combat flight hours. Technical evaluations in the 98th percentile." He looked up from the file. and a series of formal complaints about aircraft system vulnerabilities that were subsequently confirmed during combat operations. He turned to Colonel Reed. These commendations and technical assessments were excluded from her qualification review. Explanation? The silence that followed was deafening. Reed's composure faltered visibly, his usual authoritative stance weakening under the general's direct question. "There were concerns about integration issues, sir," Reed finally responded. "The Apache community has certain traditions and standards." "I'm well aware of the traditions," the general cut him off. "I flew Apaches in Desert Storm when they still had bugs to work out." He turned to Jenkins, who still stood nearby. "Captain, what happened up there?" Jenkins straightened. "Sir, the aircraft was fighting me. The neural system was inverting my commands, creating a feedback loop. I couldn't break it." He glanced at Elowen. "Captain Marks not only stabilized it, but demonstrated complete mastery of the aircraft under failure conditions. I couldn't have done what she did." The admission from Fort Rucker's top Apache pilot landed like a physical blow among the observers. Female ground crew members exchanged glances, something like hope flickering across their faces. General Ambrose nodded, then addressed the systems engineer again. "The neural interface inversion, has it happened before?" "Yes, sir, 3 times in testing. Each time, the test pilots had to shut down and restart, resulting in hard landings and system damage. And today, Captain Marcus is the first pilot to successfully counteract the inversion during operation. We've been trying to solve this problem for 8 months." The general turned back to Ulowen, who stood at attention despite the chaos around her. The sun had reached its zenith, casting no shadows as she waited for judgment. "Captain Marks, how did you know what to do?" For the first time since the incident began, Elowen spoke. "I didn't know, sir. I felt it. The aircraft was telling me what it needed." Her simple words resonated across the airfield. This wasn't about procedures or checklists or even training. This was about something more fundamental, a natural connection between pilot and aircraft that transcended conventional understanding. "Instinct," the general remarked. "The one thing we can't program into a machine or teach in a classroom." He looked around at the assembled crowd, then asked loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Who denied this pilot authorization?" Silence fell across the airfield. Not even the wind dared disturb the moment, as every person present realized they were witnessing something historic. Colonel Reed shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood, standing at the edge of the crowd, suddenly found his boots fascinating. General Ambrose's question hung in the air. "Who denied this pilot authorization?" When no one volunteered an answer, the general's expression hardened. He turned to face Colonel Reed directly. "I want a full investigation into the qualification review process, with particular attention to the systematic exclusion of Captain Mark's combat records." His voice carried the weight of authority that brooked no argument. "And I want to know who's been suppressing her technical assessments about aircraft vulnerabilities." The challenge was direct, the implication clear. Someone had deliberately prevented a qualified pilot from advancing, potentially endangering lives and equipment in the process. General Ambrose stepped closer to Elowen. "That wasn't just flight skill up there, Captain. That was something more. Instinct, intuition, whatever you want to call it. And we don't teach that. It can't be trained or replicated." He paused, looking her directly in the eyes. "It's the quality that separates good pilots from great ones." The validation, delivered publicly by one of the Army's most respected aviation commanders, caused a visible ripple through the crowd. Whispers began as personnel processed what they were witnessing. The general turned to address the entire assembly. Effective immediately, Captain Elowen Marcus is assigned to the AH-64E Guardian Test Program as lead evaluation pilot. Her first task will be resolving the neural interface inversion issue that she alone has demonstrated the ability to counteract. Colonel Reed stepped forward, military bearing reasserting itself. "Sir, with respect, there are protocols—" "Yes, there are," the general interrupted firmly, "including non-discrimination policies and merit-based advancement that appear to have been systematically ignored." He handed Reed a document from his aide. "These orders come directly from the Department of the Army Aviation Branch. Captain Marquise has been on their radar for some time, despite local efforts to diminish her achievements." The revelation sent murmurs through the crowd. Elowen's expression remained professional, but something shifted in her posture, a tension releasing after being held for too long. In a move rich with symbolism, Captain Jenkins stepped forward and offered Eloan his flight helmet. "I believe you'll be needing this, Captain. The neural system seems to prefer your touch. Anyway." The gesture, a decorated combat pilot voluntarily ceding his position, silenced the remaining whispers. Eloan accepted the helmet with a single nod, the exchange communicating volumes without words. Over the next several days, the incident transformed Fort Rucker. The investigation proceeded with unprecedented speed, revealing a pattern of discrimination that extended beyond Eloan to other female aviators. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood was relieved of his position on the qualification board. 2 other officers received formal reprimands. Eloan, meanwhile, immersed herself in the Apache Guardian test program, working directly with engineers to resolve the neural interface inversion issue. Her approach was revolutionary. Rather than treating the inversion as a bug to be eliminated, she recognized it as a feature to be harnessed under specific circumstances. "The system isn't failing," she explained to the engineering team. "It's adapting. The problem is that we're trying to force it into a single response pattern instead of allowing it to develop multiple pathways." Her insights led to a fundamental redesign of the neural interface, incorporating what engineers began calling the Marx protocol, an adaptive response system that could switch pathways based on situational demands, making the Apache more responsive in combat conditions. 3 weeks after the incident, General Ambrose returned to Fort Rucker for a private demonstration of the modified system. Eloan personally piloted the aircraft through a series of maneuvers that would have been impossible under the previous configuration. "You've turned a critical flaw into a tactical advantage," the general observed after the flight. "That's the kind of thinking we need more of." "Thank you, sir. The engineers did the real work. Based on your insights." He studied her for a moment. "The investigation is complete. I thought you should know the results before they become official." Eloan straightened. "Yes, sir. Your service record was deliberately altered before submission to the qualification board. Technical reports you submitted about the rotor vibration issue were classified unnecessarily to prevent distribution, and your combat hours were systematically underreported." "May I ask who was responsible, sir?" "You'll receive the full report." The general paused. "What matters now is ensuring this doesn't happen again. Which brings me to my next point. I'm recommending you for promotion to Major with assignment as Deputy Director of the Apache Testing Directorate." The promotion came through with unusual speed, a tacit acknowledgement from the Army hierarchy that wrongs needed to be righted. Eloan accepted it with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her entire career, focusing on the work rather than the recognition. 3 months later, Fort Rucker hosted the graduation ceremony for the first Apache Guardian qualification class under the new integrated training program. Eloan stood with the instruction cadre rather than the graduates, the gold oak leaves of her new rank gleaming on her shoulders. The same airfield that had witnessed her unauthorized flight now featured a demonstration team performing complex maneuvers that showcased the resolved neural interface system, modifications developed under Eloan's leadership that had eliminated the inversion problem while enhancing responsiveness. General Ambrose returned to deliver the commencement address, standing before a graduating class that included 3 women among the 12 pilots. The Apache program was created to put the most lethal aerial platform in history into the hands of the most capable pilots our nation can produce, he began, his voice carrying across the assembled personnel and families. Today, we recognize that capability isn't defined by tradition or demographics, but by skill, courage, and that rare quality of intuitive connection between pilot and aircraft. He gestured toward Eloan. Major Marcus demonstrated that quality in circumstances most of us would have found overwhelming. She then channeled that same instinct into transforming our training and technical systems, making every pilot in this program better and safer. The graduates, resplendent in their dress uniforms, listened with rapt attention. The 3 women among them occasionally glanced at Eloan, their expressions reflecting the understanding that her fight had made their presence possible. As the ceremony concluded, Colonel Reed approached Eloan. His manner was formal but respectful, the tension of their previous encounters replaced by professional courtesy. "The 1st Guardian Squadron deploys next month," he informed her. "Your modifications to the neural interface have been adopted across the platform." Thank you for informing me, Colonel. Reed hesitated, clearly uncomfortable but determined. I was wrong, Marks, about you, about the program. The investigation revealed biases I didn't recognize in myself. He extended his hand. Your work has saved lives, not just here, but wherever these aircraft deploy. Elowen accepted the handshake with professional courtesy, neither seeking nor offering more emotional closure than this simple acknowledgement of truth. Some battles were won not by defeating an enemy, but by changing their perspective. The graduates dispersed with their families, the celebration continuing across the base. Elowen walked alone among the Apaches on the flight line, running her hand along the fuselage of the aircraft she had saved that day. The machine seemed different now, not just in its technical specifications, but in its significance, a symbol of barriers overcome. Major Whelan joined her, now wearing the insignia of the base training commander. Not bad for someone who wasn't qualified 6 months ago, he observed. The aircraft never cared who was flying it, she responded, looking up at the sleek lines of the Guardian. Only how they flew. True, but people cared. Too much. He handed her a folder. Your new orders. The Pentagon wants you to lead the next generation development team. Apparently, your instinct is now considered an essential development resource. Elowen accepted the folder, but didn't open it immediately. The weight of it in her hands represented a shift not just in her career, but in institutional thinking. You knew, didn't you? She asked. That day with the maintenance card. You knew I'd find a way into that cockpit. I knew you belonged in that cockpit, Whelan corrected with a small smile. The how was up to you. As the sun began to set over the airfield, casting long shadows from the lined-up Apaches, Elowen watched new pilots conducting their pre-flight checks. Among them were the women from the graduating class, moving with the confidence of belonging rather than the hesitancy of those who feel they must constantly prove themselves. They won't face what you did, Whelan observed, following her gaze. That's the point, Elowen replied simply. She opened her orders, scanning the contents before looking up at the aircraft silhouetted against the orange sky. The journey from rejected candidate to program leader reflected the aircraft's own evolution, both transformed by the recognition of what had been there all along, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. 6 months after the incident that had changed everything, Elowen stood before a new Apache prototype. This aircraft incorporated all the lessons learned from her experience, its neural interface redesigned from first principles rather than adapted from existing technology. The engineering team watched nervously as she conducted the initial flight test. The aircraft responded to her commands with unprecedented sensitivity, the neural system connecting pilot and machine in ways previously thought impossible. When she landed, the engineers erupted in applause. It's perfect, the lead engineer exclaimed. Response time is 32% faster than the previous model, with adaptive learning capabilities that improve with each flight. Elowen removed her helmet, considering her response carefully. Not perfect, she corrected, but it's listening now, and so are we. The statement captured the essence of what had changed, not just in the technology, but in the people around it. The systems had always had potential. They simply needed the right pilot to demonstrate it. Back in her office, Elowen added a final note to the neural interface documentation. The system doesn't need perfect pilots. It needs pilots who listen to what the aircraft is trying to tell them. She placed a framed photo on her desk, not of herself, but of the 3 women from the graduating class standing proudly before their assigned Apaches. Below it, a simple inscription read, "It was never about being first. It was about ensuring you wouldn't be the last." That evening, as the base quieted for the night, Elowen returned to the simulator lab where her journey had begun. The facility had been upgraded with the new neural interface technology, creating a training environment that matched the actual aircraft experience. A young lieutenant was practicing when Elowen entered, her concentration absolute as she navigated a complex emergency scenario. Without interrupting, Elowen observed the pilot's technique, noting the intuitive adjustments, the natural flow between thought and action. When the simulation ended, the lieutenant turned in surprise. "Major Marks, I didn't realize anyone was here." "At ease, Lieutenant. That was impressive work." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm trying to beat your record on the system's failure recovery." Elowen smiled slightly. "How close are you?" "Still 12 seconds behind, but I'm getting better." "You will," Elowen assured her. Keep trusting your instincts. The lieutenant hesitated, then asked the question Elowen had heard increasingly often. Is it true what they say, that you flew the Guardian when no one else could control it? The aircraft knew what it needed, Elowen replied. I just listened. The answer seemed to satisfy the young pilot, who returned to her practice with renewed determination. Elowen watched for a moment longer before leaving, recognizing in the lieutenant's focus the same drive that had sustained her through years of rejection and dismissal. In the corridor outside, she passed the wall of Apache qualification graduates. The display had been expanded, now showing all 53 original graduates plus the newest class. Among them, the 3 women's photos stood out not for their gender, but for their accomplishment, each having finished in the top percentile of their training group. And there, added to the instructors section, was Elowen's own portrait. The inscription beneath it read simply, Major Elowen Marks, Neural Systems Pioneer. No mention of being the first woman to qualify. No special designation or asterisk by her name. Just recognition of her contribution, on equal footing with every other instructor who had shaped the program. As she walked across the darkened airfield toward her car, Elowen looked up at the night sky where stars were beginning to appear. The same stars she had navigated by during combat missions. The same infinite space that had always called to pilots, regardless of who they were or where they came from. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the next prototype, the next generation of pilots, the next barrier to overcome. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, she allowed herself to acknowledge how far they had all come. Not just her personal journey from rejected candidate to program leader, but the institution's evolution from rigid tradition to recognition of talent in all its forms. Change never came easily to military organizations, but when it did come, when necessity and opportunity aligned with the right catalyst, it could be transformative. The Apache silhouettes stood like sentinels along the flight line, their distinctive profiles unchanged, yet somehow different now. They were no longer symbols of an exclusive fraternity, but of possibility, aircraft waiting for the right pilots, regardless of who those pilots might be. In her pocket, Elowen carried the note she had found on her windshield that day, kept as a reminder. Some aircraft just aren't meant for women pilots. She would frame it someday, perhaps when the statement seemed as antiquated and absurd as it deserved to be. For now, though, the work continued. There were systems to perfect, pilots to train, and boundaries still to push. The sky remained as it always had been, limitless for those with the skill and courage to claim it, indifferent to anything except the pure language of flight that transcended all human categories.